Good morning. So let's get started. We've been looking. Last week we looked at the end of chapter 13 and chapter 14 in John, and today chapters 15 and 16. We mentioned that the whole section, starting in chapter 13, verse 31, through chapters 14, 15, and 16, is called a farewell address of Jesus to his disciples, and it's a private conversation. It's not a public teaching of Jesus, and you don't find it in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. But John includes all of these things that, number one, they didn't understand at the time, and that's a big difference between John and the other three Gospels, but also more advanced things and more private things, things that weren't really part of preaching the gospel to the masses, things that were private instruction to the 12 disciples. At this point, there are only 11 because Judas Iscariot has already gone out to betray him. And we'll start out in verses 1 through 8 of chapter 15, where Jesus said, "I am the true vine. My Father is the vineyard keeper. Every branch in me that does not produce fruit, he removes. And he prunes every branch that produces fruit, so that it will produce more fruit. You are already clean because of the word I've spoken to you. Remain in me, and I in you. Just as a branch is unable to produce fruit by itself unless it remains on the vine, so neither can you unless you remain in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. The one who remains in me and I in him produces much fruit, because you can do nothing without me. If anyone does not remain in me, he's thrown aside like a branch, and he withers. They gather them, throw them into the fire, and they are burned. If you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you want, and it will be done for you. My Father is glorified by this, that you produce much fruit and prove to be my disciples." This translation says remain. A lot of your translations will say abide or dwell. Abide in me. It's a sense of permanence. God uses this word in the Old Testament when he's talking about abiding with the nation of Israel, his chosen people. And I gave one example here in full from Ezekiel 37. My dwelling place shall be with them, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. Then the nations will know that I am the Lord who sanctifies Israel, when my sanctuary is in their midst forevermore. Here it's the form of the word dwell, in this translation, dwelling place. God dwells, abides, remains with us permanently. That's the promise he gave to the nation of Israel. And Jesus is renewing this promise, but saying, you have to abide with me. You have to permanently remain with me in order to be my follower. There's a little play on words, and quite often, of course, they didn't understand these words at the time, and that's another theme of John. There are several times in the book of John where there's kind of a little double meaning that they didn't really understand. In verse 2, the word prune is used. He prunes every branch that produces fruit so that it'll produce more fruit. But the word prune is actually a translation of a word that has a broader meaning that means to clean something. I guess to prune a branch, you're cleaning off the dead parts. It's a cleansing. The only other time this word is used in the New Testament is a passage that we're familiar with from Hebrews, where the author of Hebrews is saying they used to have to offer a sacrifice every week. Now, if that sacrifice could have cleansed them from knowledge of sin, it wouldn't have to go on sacrifice after sacrifice. But with Jesus Christ, we have a sacrifice once and for all, implying that Jesus' sacrifice cleanses us once and for all. And there it's, in verse 2 of Hebrews 10, it's translated cleansed. But it's the same word translated here as pruned. And so there was this cleaning theme, purifying theme that goes back to the beginning of the farewell address, where they were purified by Jesus' sacrifice, and they were also purified by removing Judas Iscariot from their midst that we looked at last week. And you can see in the next verse, verse 3, you are already clean because of the word I have spoken to you. So he's using the noun form. So basically, even though it's translated pruned, you can think of verses 2 and 3 as the Father cleans all of his branches so that they can produce more fruit. But you are already clean because you've received the word that I've spoken to you. And those verses we read about how if the branch doesn't stay attached to the vine, it dies, it withers, it's thrown into the fire. The branch can do nothing without the vine. It's an object lesson. It's an image. You can't do anything without me. He's telling his disciples, you're completely dependent on me. I'm the vine that gives you life. You are absolutely dependent on me for blessings. And then there are two different themes, the abide theme, the remain permanently with Christ theme, and the bearing fruit theme. We're part of verses 7 and 8. The reason he prunes is so we can bear more fruit. My Father is glorified that you can produce much fruit and prove to be my disciples. Early Christians commenting on this passage noted, think about this object lesson of a vine with branches coming off of it. Who benefits? It's the branches that benefit. They're the ones whose life is dependent on it. You can lose some branches and the vine's okay. The lesson for us is total dependency on Christ. The whole relationship with Christ is not really a 50-50 relationship, just like between a vine and the branches. It's for our benefit. What Christ did is for our benefit. It's not that the branches benefit the vine, it's the other way around. And therefore, we should always be grateful, never proud, because we should recognize that we depend upon Christ for all these blessings, and that without him, we would be a withered branch, dead. Now, Jesus is using some imagery that should be familiar to his followers from the Old Testament, because vines and vineyards were images in the Old Testament for the nation of Israel. That means that Jesus is, in a subtle way here, I am the true vine. What's he saying? He's the new Israel. If Israel was the vine in God's vineyard, but Jesus says now, I'm the true vine, that he's saying something new. The whole theme that we've been bringing out from John is that Jesus was superior to their rituals and to the temple and to the festivals and so on. Jesus is saying now, I'm replacing those things. I'm the new, true nation of Israel. I'm the new vine, the true vine. Then later in chapter 15, he speaks about the love that the disciples have to have for one another. Starting in verse 12, this is my command, love one another as I have loved you. No one has greater love than this, that someone would lay down his life for his friends. You are my friends if you do what I command you. I do not call you slaves anymore, because a slave doesn't know what his master's doing. I've called you friends, because I have made known to you everything I have heard from my Father. You did not choose me, but I chose you. I appointed you that you should go out and produce fruit, and that your fruit should remain, so that whatever you ask the Father in my name, he will give you. This is what I command you, love one another. Now, last week, we talked about how Jesus said, I give you a new commandment. Love one another as I have loved you. And at first, that doesn't seem new. It's the part, as I have loved you, that we discussed last. That's what makes it new. It's not just don't do bad things to other people because you wouldn't want bad things done to you and so on. No, it's a positive command that says, I loved you in what way? Total self-sacrifice, even to the point of death. So now the 11 who remain, the 11 are being told, you have to love even to the point of death. You have to love self-sacrificially, even to the point of death. And of course, they did. Many of them became martyrs, we know from church history. And that is spelled out in verse 13. It was a little bit subtle in chapter 14, but verse 13, after he said this new command, love one another, he says, no one has greater love than this, that someone would lay down his life for his friends. So the self-sacrificial to the point of death is made explicit in chapter 15 by Jesus. And then those verses that followed said, a slave or a servant doesn't even understand everything his master tells him to do. He doesn't even, he does it without knowing everything. But I've revealed everything that the Father told me. I've told you everything, so you aren't slaves or servants anymore. You're my friends now. They've been elevated by Jesus' teaching and example, and the point is so that they can go out and bear fruit. Now, of course, we like to apply everything as if Jesus is talking to us, but let's remember, he's talking to the 11. What kind of fruit are they going to bear? Well, the church. The church is going to begin at Pentecost, and they are going to be the ones who have to bear fruit, these 11, by growing that church. That's their mission. That's why Jesus has revealed everything from the Father, even things they don't understand that we keep coming across in the Gospel of John, so that they can go bear fruit. And the fruit that they bear is us, amongst others. It's the church today. We're grateful to them. Those self-sacrificing 11 who were willing to bear fruit and to love to the point of being killed, we owe them, right? It will abide. That word that means it will be permanent. It will last. And it has. And then we have a theme that's very strong in the farewell address. Jesus is preparing them. He's just, hours away, really, from being arrested and so on. So he has to prepare them for the bad things that are coming, one of which is that they will be persecuted. That's why he has to remind them, love even to the point of laying down your life. But now he has to talk about how the world is going to hate them. Starting in verse 18. If the world hates you, understand that it hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world would love you as its own. However, because you are not of the world, but I have chosen you out of it, the world hates you. Remember the word I spoke to you. A slave is not greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will also persecute you. If they kept my word, they will also keep yours. A couple of chapters back, he used this same phrase, a slave is not greater than his master, when he was washing the disciples' feet, right in chapter 13 of John, the beginning. And the lesson he was giving is, if it's not beneath me to wash your feet, to be a servant, then it's not beneath you. You're my servant. I'm the master and you're my servant. If the master's willing to do something, the servant can't object, say it's beneath him. So Jesus' humble act of foot washing service was to be an example to them, and he reminded them, a slave's not greater than his master. If I'm willing to do this, you're willing to do this. And now he's saying, the world hates me first before it hated you. Servant is not greater than his master. If the world hates me, why do you think you would escape being hated by the world? Why would the world love you and hate me if you're really going to be my messengers and servants? You're not above me. You don't get to get let off from what's happening. Then he goes on to say in verse 25, this happened so that the statement written in their law might be fulfilled. They hated me without a cause. Lots of messianic psalms are written when David, who we've been reading about this week in our chronology, when David is being persecuted, when David is being pursued by Saul and his soldiers, when David is about to die, or almost, David writes psalms in which he expresses his anguish that his life is in danger and that he's persecuted. But those psalms also have language in them that doesn't apply perfectly to David, that seems to be forward-looking. And when we studied Messianic prophecy, we saw some of that. So some of those psalms fit perfectly with David's present situation when he wrote it. But then some of the language gets a little mysterious and doesn't really fit until the Messiah comes. But as he writes these psalms, one of the things David says multiple times is, not only does he have enemies, not only is he unfairly persecuted, he uses this phrase, they hate me without a cause. And so Jesus is saying that Jesus being hated and the 11 being hated is a fulfillment of this phrase from the Messianic Psalms. Then we move on in the farewell discourse to the last chapter of it, chapter 16. Jesus says, I have told you these things to keep you from stumbling. They will ban you from the synagogues. In fact, a time is coming when anyone who kills you will think he's offering service to God. Sounds like Saul of Tarsus, actually, doesn't it? And others. They will do these things because they haven't known the Father or me. But I have told you these things so that when the time comes, you may remember I told them to you. I didn't tell you these things from the beginning because I was with you. So there's things that he didn't need to tell them all along when he was with them. But now that he's about to go, now that he's about to be parted from them and killed, he's telling them these things. But he recognizes Not only do they need to be warned about the persecution so that they won't fall away, but he recognizes explicitly, when the time comes, you'll remember these words. In other words, he really doesn't expect them to completely understand it right now, does he? It's hard for us to put our minds back at that point in time, but the crucifixion, the resurrection haven't happened yet. And they're not fully understanding. He keeps talking about going away and he has to die. And why is that? Well, it's very disturbing to them. He's saying, when the time comes, you'll remember. And then you'll understand these words. And as comfort, back in chapter 14, he said, the Holy Spirit will be sent. He will be your advocate. I'll be going away. That sounds bad. After I go away, you'll be hated and persecuted. That sounds doubly bad. But the Holy Spirit will be with you. He'll be advocating on your behalf. And he comes back to the theme of the Holy Spirit in verse 7. Nevertheless, I'm telling you the truth. It is for your benefit that I go away. Because if I don't go away, the counselor or advocate, the Holy Spirit, will not come to you. If I go, I will send him to you. So this is more of that if language that isn't really uncertainty. It's saying, just as he said back in chapter 14, I have to go away in order for you to have a place prepared in heaven. Now he's saying, I have to go away in order for the Holy Spirit to come to you instead. And so there will be comfort. He wants to reassure them. He's told them all these terrible things. I'm going away. I'm dying. I'm going away, and then they're going to hate you and persecute you. There's got to be some reassurance. Part of it is all of the language that you need to abide in me. You have to, because I'm the true vine and you'll be nothing without me. But also, not just that you have to, but that the Holy Spirit is going to be there to help you. So it's not all some sort of hopeless situation to dread. And of course, he recognizes that they don't understand everything. Verse 12, I still have many things to tell you, but you can't bear them now. When the Spirit of truth comes, he will guide you into all the truth, for he will not speak on his own, but he will speak whatever he hears. He will also declare to you what is to come. So he's saying, keep this placeholder in your memory. I know you don't understand everything right now. I promise you, someday very soon you will. The Holy Spirit will help you understand it. I can't really explain it all to you right now. Then he's going to teach them. Doesn't Jesus teach them after the resurrection? From Jerusalem up to Galilee, he spends time teaching them. He teaches them some more things, which presumably, if he told them all right now, they just wouldn't understand. So what's the point of, let's save some of that for after the resurrection. And then the very last verse of this farewell address, the last verse of chapter 16. I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. You will have suffering in this world. Be courageous. I have conquered the world. So his final message to them in the farewell address is, I've told you all these terrible things, that are about to come. But be at peace. The world hates you. There's going to be suffering in this world, but I've conquered the world. So you don't have to worry about it. As long as you stay attached to the true vine has conquered the world. So you don't have to worry about the world. The other side of that coin is if you don't stay attached to the true vine, then you do have to worry. Right? And so this is how he leaves the disciples. We'll see next week in chapter 17, he goes off to pray, for example, and then after that he gets arrested and so on. This is the end, though, of the gathering the 11 together and giving them all the teaching that's needed to prepare them for what's right about to happen. His arrest, his crucifixion, his departure from this world. This is their final preparation is, don't worry. As he said back in chapter 14, I've conquered the world. Let not your hearts be troubled. Here he says, have peace. Be at peace. Do not worry. I've conquered the world. So, let's take a look, just in outline form. I am the true vine is the last of 7 I am sayings. And these are metaphors. They're not literal, they're not easy to understand, and they're not found in the other Gospels, so that's typical of John. I am the bread of life, he said, in the context of feeding the 5,000. He declared himself to be superior to the manna that they had in the wilderness, because when you ate the manna, you got hungry again. He says, but I'm the bread of life. Eat of me, you never get hungry again. I'm the light of the world, he said in chapter 8 and 9. That was in the context of coming to the Feast of Booths or Tabernacles, where they had a light ceremony and they would light up the temple with a bunch of lanterns. And he said, that's great, that's light on the temple. I'm light for the whole world. So he is declaring himself superior to that festival. I am the door. In the Good Shepherd discourse, I'm the door to the sheepfold. A thief comes in some other way, the master comes right in the door, and the sheep understand his voice. And then in the same passage, I am the Good Shepherd. So these two images are, if he is the door to the sheepfold, that's like I am the way in chapter 14. He's the exclusive path to salvation. But also he's a good shepherd. In Ezekiel, the leaders of Israel were criticized as bad shepherds who have led the people astray. And he has referred to the Pharisees in this passage as if they are bad shepherds, but he's the good shepherd. I am the resurrection and the life. He spoke to Martha right when he was about to raise Lazarus from the dead. Do you believe in the resurrection? She said, well, I believe that someday we'll all get resurrected. No. Right now, do you believe in the resurrection? Right now, there's going to be a resurrection. And of course, we saw, I am the way, the truth, and the life, where he declared he was the exclusive path to the Father. I am the true vine. We saw the significance is, I am therefore the new Israel. Greater than the temple and the rituals and so on. The true vine is greater than the old vine. So the I am sayings parallel the superiority of Jesus to all the old rituals and festivals and the temple and so on. And this is something distinctive about the Gospel of John, is the I am sayings. Next week we'll pick up with the Garden of Gethsemane.